Hello, everyone. My name is Amira Al Soussi. I teach at the American University in Dubai, and I'm an EdT candidate at the University of Exeter. Now, today, I'm going to talk to you about one of the studies I've conducted to investigate teachers' perspectives of their students' writing motivation. Here, we're talking about ESL students in writing classes at higher education institutions in the UAE. Now, specifically in my study, I'm um, actually investigating the student motivational challenges that teachers face in the writing classes and what these teachers do to enhance their students' writing motivation. Now, the reason I chose this topic is my long experience teaching these ESL students and noticing that they lack writing motivation and they always try to avoid any writing task.
Okay, now I would like each writing instructor to take a moment and reflect on their students' reaction to writing in their class. How do your students react when you inform them that they're going to work on a writing task? Now let's look at these images and decide. If your students react like these students in the image on the left, that means either you're a lucky teacher to have such students, or you are someone or you're a teacher who implements motivating teaching strategies in class. Now, if you look at the other images and you feel that your students react this way, it means no, we have to stop and we have to investigate why and see what kind of strategies we can implement in our class in order to improve our students' motivation and enhance their writing at the same time. Okay. So, as you all know, students at university are required to take several English courses, especially writing courses, to graduate with a bachelor's degree. And if these students don't pass these courses, they are asked to repeat them and they're not allowed to graduate without passing these courses. So, if you see these students in these classes, you notice that they experience mixed feelings of anxiety, fear, lack of power and confidence and avoidance at the thought of writing. And research has proven that it is not only aptitude that matters. It is not only aptitude, but it is also motivation that influences students' success in learning a second language. And I believe the same applies to writing. So, writing is basically influenced by students' motivation. Um, Now, if we dig deeper, we notice that teachers' behavior is an influential motivational tool. It is one of the most important tools that affect students' motivation. These teachers seem to develop their own maxims, principles, and then they develop their teaching strategies based on these maxims and principles. So, when I wanted to conduct that research, I felt like it's worth investigating teachers' experiences, teachers' attitudes, what they think about their students' motivation. I did not survey students or interview students and ask them about their motivation because we have a lot of studies uh, that have done this. But I decided to see what the teachers think. These teachers who stay for long hours in the class and they know their students. So I decided to investigate what these teachers believe about their students' motivation and what strategies they use to improve their students' writing motivation. Now, before getting directly into the topic and into my research study, let's just see what the literature says about motivation. Now, what is motivation? There has been a lot of debate about what motivation is, but most research agrees that it is what directs human behavior, including what? Including the choice of a particular action, the persistence with it, and the effort expended on it. Before talking about writing motivation research, it is worth mentioning some points about L2 motivation research. L2 motivation research passed through three periods. The first period is the social psychological period. In that period, the prominent figure was Gardner, and he came up with the integrative instrumental motivation dichotomy. According to him, students are motivated when they have positive feelings toward the community that speaks that language. In addition to that, the student should see the practical benefits of learning a foreign language, maybe in a job or in their education. Then came the cognitive situated period. In this period, the researchers did not negate what previous researchers said, but they added that students should have positive feelings and attitudes towards their abilities, their, the possibilities they have, their potentials, and their performances. Then came the process oriented period. In this period, researchers did not see motivation as a static construct. They said that no, motivation is dynamic, and in order to be studied, it should be studied over a period of time. For example, from the beginning of a certain task till the end of the task. Motivation for them is more than simply arousing interest. It also involves sustaining interest and investing time and energy into putting the necessary effort to achieve certain goals. Let's talk about L2 writing motivation research. According to this research, students exhibit low levels of interest in writing. Why? Because to them, writing is a hard, daunting activity. It needs a lot of time and effort. And there are many constraints, those of the topic, audience, purpose, writing conventions, rhetorical modes, and critical thinking as well. Now, research has shown that writing motivation develops when what? When writing tasks are not seen as products, no, but as authentic, purposeful interactions. When writing contributes to a discourse community of writers, and when students consider themselves as competent writers, they can do it, they're able to do it. Now, what are the motivational challenges mentioned in research? One kind is the teacher external factors and challenges, like they can be beyond control sometimes, like flawed education systems and students' laziness and so on, while the other one is the teacher internal factors or challenges, like task relevance, incompatible teaching methods, and so on. Now, in my study, I was basically informed by two frameworks. The first one is Dornier's framework of motivational teaching practices in L2 classrooms, and the second one is Bruning and Horn's four clusters of writing motivation enhancing conditions. In my study, I had three research questions. Number one, how do English teachers at higher education institutions in the UAE perceive their ESL students' writing motivation? Number two, what are the teachers' perceptions of the major student motivational challenges they face in their writing classes? And number three, what strategies do these teachers use to enhance their students' writing motivation? Here is some information about my research design. For methodology, I used qualitative exploratory research approach because I aim to investigate my students' experiences in detail. For my participants, they were four female English instructors. Two of them had a doctorate and two had masters. They were different nationalities and they taught at three private universities in the UAE, where English is the medium of instruction. They taught academic writing to students whose level on TOEFL is 500 or 5.5 on IELTS. I used semi-structured interviews and thematic analysis. And for ethical consideration, of course, I started collecting my data after I got approval from the university. And I sent my participants the information sheet and asked them to sign a consent form and promised them to use pseudonyms and to keep their personal details confidential. Now, here are my findings. The first theme was teachers' perceptions of students' writing motivation. When I asked my participants about student motivation, they said motivated students are those who show willingness, engagement, and persistence. One of the teachers said, if you have motivation, you have an intrinsic, self guided desire to take part in the process and accomplish something. whatever the reason might be. However, when they described their students' motivation in the writing classes, they said most students' level of motivation is low. One of the teachers said 20% of her students want to write. Other students would just sit there and stare. I have students who would be writing, but when I ask them, it's not because they're so motivated, it's just because they have to. Here is the second theme, which answers the second research question. Students writing motivational challenges. In my research, my participants talked about several challenges. The first one is student intrinsic motivation. Unfortunately, most students seem to lack intrinsic motivation to writing and to learning in general. One of the participants said, we're swimming against the current. Whatever we do, they don't appreciate writing. No, not just writing. They don't have a passion for learning, unfortunately. Now, the second challenge was the cost of writing. For these students, writing is very costly. It is physically, psychologically, and emotionally costly. One of the teachers also exclaimed there, when you give them a piece of writing, they immediately think of how time consuming it's going to be. It's such a physical effort for them. So the first thing they say when they see the papers and that writing task, oh, do you want us to write 2 pages? Unfortunately. Now, the third challenge is the value of writing. These students seem to be unaware of the importance of writing. They know, okay, writing is important, but why? They don't know. They think that they're doing different majors like accounting and business and engineering. So why do they have to take an English course? Why do they have to write? So one of my participants said that her students would say, why should I write if my major is accounting? I don't need all of this. Unfortunately, they don't know the value of writing in their studies. And the last challenge is self-efficacy and expectancy. These students don't have self-confidence. They don't see themselves as competent writers. So, like one of the participants said, they start a task knowing that they can't do it. Here, one participant said, there's a fear of getting those words on paper in another language, as they are not confident of writing in English. It's their second language. And another said, some come from a background where the focus on writing was not very successful. They view writing as a very boring process because of previous instructors or previous experiences. So some students don't feel confident about writing and they don't like writing because of their schooling and past experiences. Teachers' motivational strategies is the last theme in my research. It answers the third research question. My participants talked about different approaches and strategies they use in class in order to motivate their students to write. One of them is creating a pleasant and supportive atmosphere. How? They talked about different approaches they use in class. One of them said, I build rapport with them. I try to make them comfortable with the idea that they can write. I'm just there to sharpen the edges in some area. So she gives her students confidence and she just tells them, I'm here to support. Another said, I show them a model. Someone who was in college wrote this paragraph, for example. When they read it, they feel it's realistic. It is very important to model to your students. It can be you or get any writing from a previous student. They know what they have to do then. A third teacher said, I start with simple tasks, so I just give them small papers to lessen their anxiety. And as research has shown, anxiety is an enemy to motivation. So it is important to start with your students gradually, give them a small task, a simple task, and then move on. Here, another teacher said, I share my experiences with them. I tell them that I'm not a native speaker like you. but I can publish in good journals. So this gives them hope. It tells them that, like, okay, you can do that. The second point is, or the second strategy is stimulating, providing some stimulating and enjoyable writing. How can writing be stimulating and enjoyable? Let's see what the teacher said. Students go for the more challenging topics. Students are not only motivated, but they're actually engaged. It is surprising that students don't go for the safe topic or for the topic that they know. This teacher said no, they would go for a new topic, for a more challenging topic. Another teacher said students are asked to create a learning device. They have to describe it in a presentation, and then they have to write a letter to any company in Dubai proposing their device. So this way of teaching writing is interesting. Why? Because it goes through like a project. They have to create something, they have to present about it, and the end is what? Is a piece of writing to a company, which is very realistic. Now, a third way here is blogging. When they blog, they seem much freer and they like it as they can do a lot of stuff. They can comment on their friends' posts, they can post something. So blogging is very interactive and very motivating. Now, here the last thing is I make the task authentic. For example, this teacher who talked about the project, she said to make it authentic, she gets someone who teaches at the same school, a colleague, and this colleague will be the investor and will sit and attend the presentation. And then the students have to write a letter to this investor. So it's going to be what? Very authentic and very realistic. They have a goal to achieve at the end. The third strategy is effective teaching. How can teaching writing be effective? Writing is never a product, it's a process. So one of my participants said, I always go through a process. We workshop and we do a first draft and a second draft. They come back, they talk to each other, they discuss their writing, and it takes a while. Another teacher talked about something very realistic. She said, my students are not native speakers, so they don't have a lot of ideas and vocabulary, so I asked them to research a certain topic and then come back and write. It is very preliminary research that they do, but they start seeing writing in a different light. They're not writing in a vacuum. A third teacher said, I have them workshop their brainstorming and outline together. I usually find it motivating, but she what? She doesn't ask them to do the writing together. She asks them to do it individually. Why? Because she's afraid some competent ones would take over. Okay, here another strategy can be autonomous learning. It's very important. Students should be given the freedom at some point. One of the teachers said, I try to give them choices when giving them the topic. Another said, they vote for the best three or four topics and then they choose one of them. There's always freedom. Here we have, they wrote the movie critique only when I gave them the freedom to choose their own movie. I remember that participant. She asked her students to watch a certain movie and write about it. Nobody did that activity. When she asked them to choose the movie they want and write about it, everyone did it. So freedom is very important for students. Oh, here the last point is very important, which is constructive feedback. When we talk about feedback, that doesn't mean giving them a 70 or an 80 out of 100. No, teachers need to give students words and feedback and tell them about their performance. One of my participants said when they get feedback in a timely way, even if it's just one additional sentence or a word they fuse differently. Anything which makes them feel as though their writing is progressing in a certain direction, it helps them. So even if you add like a simple remark or comment, it helps the students. It should be timely. We don't wait till the end and give feedback. No, the feedback should be given along the process. Now, another good way of giving feedback is conferencing. That teacher said They come to my office for a 10-minute conference after they've worked for days on their essays and they received feedback. This is just a way for them to look at it with new eyes and to see what else could be done. So she sits with each student for 10 minutes. They talk about, for example, the strengths, weaknesses, and she advises her students on what should be done. To discuss my findings, most of them were in line with the literature. The first point is, as in the literature, most students in my research experience low levels of writing motivation, especially here we're talking about ESL writing classes. Now, why? The sacrifice, anxiety, and fatigue involved in writing prevent students' engagement. Motivation lessens when learners are convinced that they cannot succeed, no matter how hard they try and if the task does not yield valued results. Now, good points to learn and to use in our writing classes are first, relevance and authenticity in task design are of great significance. Process writing, again, is very important because it alleviates anxiety and enhances productivity and self regulation skills. Gaining and maintaining autonomy nurtures students' motivation. Collaboration is important. Collaboration with peers as well as with a tutor gives students more awareness of their strengths and weaknesses and of useful strategies that they learn from others. Constructive feedback is very important. It promotes learners' motivation and ensures linguistic accuracy. Now I come to my conclusion, recommendations, and the limitations of my study. Now, the first point, which is very important, is there is a need to assist students in learning not only how to write, but also how to want to write. Motivation is very important. Teachers' voices should be heard. Teachers are important. They are there in a classroom, and their experiences should be explored because they have the practical definitions of motivation and they have the substantial responsibility of crafting their students' learning experiences. Now, more L2 motivation research is still necessary in writing context specifically. We have to consider teachers' experiences in dealing with the complexities they encounter in their classrooms. So, more research in writing context is recommended and needed. Now, one of the limitations of my study is using only interviews. So, probably because it was a small scale study, using multiple methods or triangulation would have given richer interpretations of a complex activity like learners' writing motivation. Here are the references that I used in my presentation. Thank you all for listening, and for any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me on my email.